Hola amigos, this is Greg Basco coming to you from my home office in the cloud forest of Costa Rica. And I've had a little more time to play around with Topaz AI DeNoise and Sharpen. And in this video, I really wanted to look at it in terms of night landscapes. I really love landscape photography. Some of you might know me more as a bird and wildlife photographer, but I like landscapes every bit as much as I like birds or wildlife or macro. I like everything in equal doses. So I was excited to try out the Topaz AI suite, especially the two big guns, DeNoise and Sharpen, for night landscapes, which is something I don't get to do a lot of, but whenever I do get to do it, I'm really excited about it. So I wanted to look at four basic things. Will Topaz, especially DeNoise, help us out with kind of the common luminance noise and color noise that we have to deal with in night landscapes? We're using high ISOs, and we're usually using fairly long exposures that are going to generate color noise. So that's the first question I wanted to investigate. The second question I wanted to investigate was whether the order of operations matters. That is, do you do your adjustments in Lightroom, Camera Raw, Photoshop first, then take it over to DeNoise to get rid of the noise, or do you take your raw file straight to DeNoise and then bring it back to your core program to see how you can tweak your exposure and colors and do all the things you'd normally do to a photo. Third, I wanted to see, especially if Sharpen AI would help out a little bit when we have moving objects, say a tree, if you're lucky enough to have an animal, and you're using continuous light, it's going to move during the exposure. Even the stars are going to apparently move as the Earth rotates and the stars stay in their fixed position. So I wanted to see, would Sharpen help us out with that? And fourth, I wanted to revisit some very old photos where I'm dealing with a lot of high ISO noise because the camera bodies just weren't able to deal with things as well. And to kind of double down and up the ante, I was going to use a few pictures from Costa Rica where the temperatures are quite high even at night. So you're going to get even more color noise as the sensor heats up over time because the outside temperature is higher. So let's jump right in and take a look. But don't forget to hit like, please. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm going to be producing a lot more content over the coming months. And take a look at the affiliate links down below if you'd like to purchase Topaz AI products. I get a little something to buy me some coffee, and that would make me happy. Let's get into it. By the way, two shameless plugs, little product placement here for Godox, my favorite flashes. And I'm working hard right now on my Flash for the Nature Photographer ebook, as you can see on my computer screen over there. Stay tuned. I'll be coming out with that. It's going to be a big, comprehensive project, and I hope you'll enjoy that. But now, on to Lightroom, and let's take a look at Topaz AI for night landscapes. Here we are in Lightroom, and I've put together a nice little collection of pictures that I think will help us to answer the questions that I posed in the intro. So first off, I have a couple of pictures from Chile, in the extreme south in Patagonia, in the extreme north in the Atacama Desert, and I'd like to look at those with you and see how DeNoise handles the typical luminance and color noise that we deal with as nocturnal landscape photographers. After that, I'd like to take a look at a picture from the cloud forest of Costa Rica, one of my favorite eco lodges, and what I want to explore here is whether the order of operations matters. This is my Lightroom version of this image, and I think it's kind of cool. I just gotten a fisheye lens before I took this picture. And what I did in Lightroom is to brighten up the foreground and add a little bit of contrast. And so what I'd like to see is whether doing that first and then taking it to DeNoise makes a difference in terms of how DeNoise can handle the noise removal process versus taking it straight from the raw file into DeNoise and letting DeNoise work on the raw data and then later doing our adjustments in Lightroom. So I think that'll be a fun test. And after that, I'd like to take a look at a picture from New Mexico where I have thousands of sandhill cranes in a night scene. And I'd like to explore there whether Sharpen AI can help to bring back sharpness or create sharpness in moving objects during nocturnal landscapes, because that's a big deal. You might have a tree blowing in the wind. You might have, if you're lucky enough to have birds, you might have them moving around during a 20-30 second exposure. And so we'll take a look at that. And then finally, I'd like to take a look at a couple of pictures, old pictures from here in Costa Rica on tropical beaches, and see how DeNoise can handle old photos taken with older cameras, and also more extreme noise challenges in the sense that they are older cameras, and also that I'm working in higher temperatures, which means that color noise is going to be more of an issue. And you'll see here that I also have an eyelash viper photo in this collection, but I'm going to save that for a separate video where I'm going to walk you through how I would process this from start to finish in Lightroom and see how DeNoise might work into that process. So let's get right into it. Let's get on to the first kind of simple question, and let's take a look at this photo from Patagonia. And this was taken right outside the lodge where I stayed with my workshop group either last year or maybe the year before, I can't remember. Beautiful view over the Cuernos del Paine, the horns of the Paine. Paine is an indigenous word that means blue, by the way. And so this is my photo that I've worked up in Lightroom, and basically I just did a little bit of color adjustment. You can see here that I have my temperature down low because I wanted to accentuate that this was kind of a moonlit, starry sky night, but with some wispy clouds, which I really like. I'm actually not a fan of completely clear nights for skies. I think some wispy clouds can really add to things. And a few little whites and blacks, a little bit of stuff. But I did certainly apply some noise reduction in Lightroom here. Quite a bit, both in the luminance, which is the result of the high ISO I had to use, ISO 2500, and the chrominance or color noise, which is the result of the fairly long exposure time, 20 seconds. There's no data here because I used a Rokinon 24mm lens, I believe, which doesn't have electronic coupling, and so it doesn't transmit any aperture or lens data to the camera. And so this was my result with a lot of noise reduction in Lightroom, and you can check it out. I brushed out some noise reduction selectively in certain areas. It's okay. It's okay. And I had to leave a little bit of noise in the sky, or else it just wiped everything out too much. And so I actually left some of the detail slider in Lightroom, and I didn't crank the luminance or the color noise reduction all the way to their maximum values to retain some semblance of detail. Now, what I've done here is I've created a virtual copy of this file, and it has all of my pretty slight Lightroom adjustments intact, except what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this over to DeNoise and see how it handles it. But before I do that, I'm going to pull the luminance noise reduction slider all the way down and the color noise reduction slider all the way down. And let's take a look at what at this time I was shooting a Canon 5 DSR, which it still is an amazing camera for resolution, but certainly not a high ISO champion. And so we definitely have both some luminance and color noise going on in this picture. So let's hop over into DeNoise AI and see how it handles it. Here we are, finally. We've gotten this photo into DeNoise, and I'm going to go ahead and just do the auto. And I'll click Update Preview. And I don't have Update Preview set as default because I find it just slows things down every time you move around, every time you change one value. And so I just want to update preview when I want to. There's the auto. I would say that is not a very good job. I'm going to switch over to the split view. And to be honest, I can't even tell what's before and after. I'm going to update this one more time. Yeah, okay, so we can see a little difference, but not much. That really didn't help very much at all. So I'm going to take noise reduction way up and try recovering details and see what happens there. I still want to leave, I think, enhanced sharpness because I do want to retain some sort of detail for the stars. And let's see how this works. Okay, at least we're starting to see something happen. It looks really, really uneven though. This part looks fairly good. One of the things when you do noise reduction in different programs, you can sometimes kind of start to lose the stars. And what I see here is that I'm not losing any stars, but I'm still leaving a lot of color noise here. I'm going to update this once more. Okay, so again, down here it looks pretty good. There's some strange artifacts along the mountains, but again, this top part of the sky really does not look very good at all. It smoothed out noise, but it certainly didn't remove it. I don't know if it looks worse, but it really doesn't look better. It just looks like smoother color noise. So that's really not a very impressive result at all. Just move around in the photo a little bit more. And I'm going to update the preview just kind of for the shadow parts down here, and we'll see how that goes. Better down there, I would say. Yeah, for sure. Definitely better in the mountain areas, in the land areas, than in the sky areas. And again, if you use this from Photoshop, you could use this with a layer mask and get rid of some of the unevenness where it didn't do a great job up in the upper part of the sky. But to be honest, that would be tough to blend in these kind of half-removed noise effects. That would be a really tough sell. Again, I'm going to update the preview one more time and look up at the upper part of the sky. You can see where I am in the thumbnail over here. And that's what we got out of DeNoise. And this is the original. I don't know if that's a usable result at all or really any improvement, but I'm going to go ahead and say apply. Okay, so after a few minutes, and I've sped up the previous part of that video, we're back in here and I have my virtual copy. This was a failed copy where I sent it over to DeNoise, but DeNoise did not open for some reason. And then the edit number 2, that would be the one where it worked. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this photo, or at least remove it from the collection, and later I'll delete all the extras. So let's take a look at how this did and see if it looks any better in Lightroom than it did in the preview in DeNoise. Maybe the preview module in DeNoise is not so great. But I'm seeing again exactly what we saw in DeNoise, where the noise removal performance, I would say, is really, really uneven. Look at the top of the sky here, and again, see where we are. The top of the sky, it really failed to remove color noise. It kind of smoothed everything out, but now it just looks like a Seurat painting or something. It looks bizarre. Down here it did a much better job, and it did okay down in the land. It's okay. Let's take a look at my take from Lightroom, where I had noise reduction done in Lightroom, where I could play a little bit with the luminance and the color sliders and the detail sliders in Lightroom and see if that looks any better. I actually think that looks much better, I have to say. I mean, there's no... I'm going to call up the thumbnail, and if you look at the rectangle up here in the top left, you can see where I'm moving around in the photo, but you can see that at least the results are quite consistent. I've left some noise, certainly, but it's quite fine-grained noise. I think DeNoise maybe added a little bit of sharpness in these areas, which is kind of nice. But maybe I could deal with that in a few different ways if I were ready to print this photo or send it off for the web or whatever. Let's just take a quick look at the comparison of these two photos in the compare mode, and I'm going to hit Shift Tab, which hides all panels so we get a bigger view. And so again, on the left is my Lightroom version, and on the right is the Topaz DeNoise version. We can definitely see some difference in the mountains here, and maybe they look better to a degree. It certainly seemed to sharpen up the land portions some, maybe a little too much, but they definitely have some sharpening brought back in. Maybe that's something I could work with a brush in Lightroom. But again, if we look at the sky, down here, not a huge difference, but as we come up here, for some reason, this sky in what DeNoise AI gave us, I don't think I can work with that in any way at all. And so I'm going to hit Shift Tab again, and I'm going to get out of the compare mode. And then in just a second, we're going to get over to a shot of the Atacama Desert in northern Chile and see how it goes there. Okay, I'm back after a short little break. This is hard work, you know, actually. It actually is, I have to tell you. Not hard physical work, but it's hard getting everything organized and keeping on track with the narration and the plan. So this was a great opportunity I had, I believe it was last year, or maybe the year before, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, where I took my workshop group. And it was fantastic. My friends in Chile with whom I work arranged special access to these salt lakes in the desert, and we had a picnic lunch or picnic dinner out there with nice Chilean wine and everything, and then we stayed and shot the stars in the Milky Way over these amazing salt ponds. And this is the kind of thing we got. Now, I have a lot of noise in this photo, and I'm going to make it quick, but you can see that I shot at ISO 4000 with a Canon 5DSR. Great camera, but again, not a high ISO noise champ, partly because it just has a ton of megapixels, and that's part of the trade-off. I used an IRIX 15mm f2.5 lens, and I shot at the widest aperture I could. And even that, on this moonless night, gave me a 30-second exposure. And we even did a little bit of light painting on here. And so it's a nice shot, and it worked out pretty well. And this is my best take in Lightroom. And you can see I've applied some noise reduction. I haven't cranked it up full, again, because I wanted to retain some detail. But just take a look in here, and I'll show you quickly my result in Lightroom. So not too bad, certainly some noise, but pretty fine-grained after all, and even in the sand. And so now I've made another virtual copy, just as before. And in this one, I've already taken out luminance and color noise reduction in Lightroom. And so this is basically the file with just a few global tweaks in Lightroom, basic tweaks. This is basically the file right out of the camera. And as with the previous shot, you can see that there's quite a bit of color noise and some luminance noise as well, throughout the photo, I would say. And so again, this seems like a good candidate to me to see how Topaz DeNoise does with the general noise that we would get as nocturnal landscape photographers. And let's see if it does any better. So let's jump over into DeNoise and hope it does it this time, not like last time. I'm going to do this. And here we are. I'm going to back out a little bit, or can I? Guess I can't. It'll only let you zoom into 100 or even farther. I don't want to zoom in farther. That would just be really strange. I'm going to zoom in somewhere where I can see a little bit of the land, a little bit of the water below, and a little bit of the sky. And you saw in the last shot from Patagonia, Chile, way down in the south, Topaz DeNoise AI did not do a very good job at all. But I'm going to try the regular DeNoise AI. I'll try the auto really quickly and update the preview and see what that gives us. But I have another idea. There's another module in here called AI Clear, and I thought, well, maybe we'll give that a try. And what I see is pretty similar to what we saw in the Patagonia shot, where there's some smoothing certainly, but it really didn't take care of any color noise at all. And there's a lot of unevenness here. It almost looks like it applied sharpening in these areas, smoothed out in these areas, so I'm not impressed. Let's try AI Clear, and let's just take the values to high and high and high and recover no details and just see what it can do with noise, and then we'll take it from there. Well, that's much better, isn't it? Look at that. That's interesting. I mean, it's certainly, it's too much, but it certainly took out the noise, and I'm going to update the preview up here in the Milky Way, and it looks like it did it in a much more even fashion, in a much more convincing and even fashion than the regular Topaz DeNoise AI module did. Again, I think it wiped out too much detail, and I went pretty aggressive on the settings right off, but at least there isn't this sort of weird gradation across different parts of the sky where it left in a lot of color noise. I'm going to update the preview one more time toward the upper part of the Milky Way, just to make sure we're not seeing any unevenness. And I really wish we could zoom to like 50% so we could see a little more of the consistency across the photograph, but I guess that's not an option. But again, looking pretty even. So let's try medium settings for noise, enhanced sharpness high, and maybe let's try some recovered details up a little bit. And I'm going to try it again down on this part where I can see a little bit of everything, water, land, and sky, and we'll update the preview again. And that, I think, is looking quite acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and this will probably take 2 or 3 minutes to render. And I'm just going to sit here and actually sip a little red wine, which is what I'm doing while I'm staying at home, quarantining with my family. My dogs are in bed now. And I'm going to speed up this part of the video from here on. All right, well, we're back in Lightroom. I enjoyed my wine, and we sped up that video. So let's take a quick look at my take in Lightroom and the Topaz DeNoise version. I'm going to go back into the library module, sorry about that. And we'll do the old XY compare. And again, I'm going to hit Shift Tab, which will hide the panels. And on the left is my Lightroom version. And on the right is the version we just took out of Topaz DeNoise AI, but using the AI Clear module, which did a much better job on this photo than DeNoise AI, the standard module, did on the previous photo from Patagonia. This might take a few minutes. These are giant files, you know, they're 50 megapixel files from the Canon 5 DSR. So again, on the left, Lightroom, and on the right, Topaz DeNoise. And I would say in this photo, I would definitely use DeNoise again and employ the AI Clear module. I'm going to hit Shift Tab again to bring the panels back up, get out of the compare mode, and let's just take a quick look then at what Topaz DeNoise AI and the standard module did for the Patagonia photo versus what Topaz DeNoise AI and the AI Clear model did for these two photos, which I think are roughly comparable. High ISOs, same camera body, so I think we can compare those pretty well. And let's take a look. And look at the results again on the left, where we did the standard DeNoise AI module. We had all this weirdness with the color noise, where it smoothed it out, but just left them kind of as these pointillist fractals. Whereas on the right side, on the Atacama Desert photo, where I employed the AI Clear module, the results are much more consistent and much more even and much more realistic, I think. So far, what I've taken away from this little experiment is that I would try the AI Clear module within DeNoise AI first. And I'm going to take another little break, and we'll be back to look at a picture that I shot under the moonlight a few years ago at the Bosque del Paz Eco Lodge. And I'm going to want to look at here what happens if we raise the shadows first in Lightroom and kind of do our exposure, dodging and burning, and then take it to DeNoise versus taking the raw file right to DeNoise and then doing our color and exposure work back in Lightroom or Photoshop if that's your preference. So this was a really fun shot. I stayed at my favorite eco lodge, as I mentioned before, in Costa Rica called Bosque de Paz, which is only about 40 minutes from my house. And I was there for almost 10 days working on a camera trap project to photograph a nocturnal margay. And the owners, Federico and Vanessa, were nice enough to let me stay for all those days. And when I wasn't doing that, I would wander around at night and do other things, like take this shot of the lodge and one of the pavilions near the lodge where they have hummingbird feeders, which is great for our hummingbird photography on our workshops. And I would take some night shots and do some fun things like that. So this is a little stream that passes right in front of the lodge. It's a beautiful place. And this is my take. And this is a PSD file, as you can see. But I basically worked it in Lightroom, and then I actually took it to Photoshop because I tried to take out some power lines that were running way up over the mountains and across the valley, and it looks like I missed a couple, but that's why it's a PSD, because I took it into Photoshop. But in essence, this is a pretty good result for this picture. And so for this, I opened up the shadows a little bit down in the stream right in front of the bridge before you get into the little lagoon. Maybe I did a little bit of work in the forest here along the bank to kind of open up details and brighten up certain features. And I think I did a little temperature work. But the basic thing is I'm shooting at ISO 2000, which doesn't sound very high, but this was years ago, and this was a Canon 5D2 body. And 30 seconds again. So what I really want to focus on here is how DeNoise does in the foreground areas where I want to lighten up these rocks and the water that compose, that kind of lead you into the picture. And so what I've done is I've processed this picture out of the raw file, and I've lightened up the foreground. I've done some adjustment brush work in these areas. And I've created another copy then where I didn't do anything at all, and I'm going to compare what happens when I send basically the kind of unedited raw file, except for I tried to take out a little bit of the power lines, but the unedited raw file over to Topaz DeNoise versus doing kind of my exposure and brushwork first in Lightroom and then taking it to DeNoise. Because look what happens when I do this brushwork on the raw file in Lightroom. And I'm raising basically shadows and exposure in these dark areas in the long exposure at night. And look at the kind of color noise I'm getting here. It's just awful, right? And you can see where I haven't done that, you really don't notice that noise as much. And so let's see what happens. So I'm going to take first over to Topaz DeNoise AI, the one where I've already done my Lightroom work. And I'm going to move around in the photo a little bit. I really want to know especially what's happening down here and here. So I'm going to focus on that area. I'm going to go first, even though DeNoise AI module within this, the standard module didn't work too well for the previous two photos. I'm going to go ahead and try it again. I'm going to crank the noise up. Well, you know what? Let's try auto quickly, and I'll update the preview. And I would say that helped really not at all. It basically removed 40% of the color from the color noise, but not very good. I'll crank it up one more time, turn down the enhanced sharpness, and update the preview one more time, but I'm kind of losing faith at this point, as you can tell. So I think quickly we're going to jump over to AI Clear within the DeNoise AI module and see how that works. Again, this is not, it's not usable. I'd rather work work with it in Lightroom. On my result from before, and it looked much better. But let's try AI Clear, and let's try the values I used last time that were pretty successful for the Atacama Desert photo. Yeah, not any better at all, for sure. So I would say at this point, this is not usable. And so I'm just going to click cancel. No, I don't want to save the changes. So let's try the other one where I haven't done, let's see what we have here. Here we go. The raw file where I haven't done any of those kind of local exposure adjustments or anything like that. I've basically done nothing to this file, nor have I applied any noise reduction at all, neither luminance nor color in Lightroom. So let's take that into Topaz DeNoise AI, run it through, I guess, the standard noise reduction. It's hard to tell here since we're not seeing that noise that could emerge when we start to try to lighten shadows. But again, let's take a look at these areas, and we'll do auto. See, it's not seeing much noise, so I want it to try to see some noise, hopefully. It looks like it did something, certainly. Maybe mostly sharpened up edges along contrast areas, like the little highlights on the rocks, and maybe deepened shadow areas to try to remove noise. Let's just take a quick look at AI Clear, and we'll do a medium and a low on noise and sharpness. See what that does quickly. And so what I'm really looking for here is whether reducing noise, let's say inertial or potential noise in this area, will help us to avoid that noise as we start to lighten up shadows once we get back into Lightroom, or once you get back into Photoshop, if you prefer to work that way. And that actually looks like a pretty decent result. So I'm going to hit apply and save that back into Lightroom. All right, we're back in Lightroom, and let me see if I can figure out what's going on with all these files again. Here's my PSD, my best take on it. I think I can get rid of my virtual copy, right? This is so confusing when you create all these tips. Okay, right, that was my original raw file. Got it. Edit 2. So this was the one we just took out of Topaz AI Clear. This was a virtual copy that we do not need anymore, I believe. Right. Well, let's take a look here for just a second. So again, this was the virtual copy I created from my raw file, but in which I had done already some Lightroom adjustment. And remember, I had this horrible noise once I started to raise the shadows in here, especially color noise. It's really prominent. And I believe this is the one I took into DeNoise AI, and it really did nothing to help that at all. So I would call that a fail. Let's look at, again, my raw file that with no exposure brightening or shadow brightening or anything like that done in Lightroom, that I then just took into DeNoise AI and chose the AI Clear module and applied noise reduction. And that looks pretty nice. It actually sharpened up some detail, kind of up the contrast along edges, which is what sharpening is after all. Certainly took out some noise in different areas. Sky looks actually quite nice. Some stars peeking through. There's the moon. There's some, I guess we'll get rid of those. I'm going to choose the heel brush quickly. Get rid of those power lines that I missed, that I couldn't avoid. And now what I really want to see, and I'm interested to see, is whether having done noise reduction quite well in Topaz DeNoise AI through the AI Clear module, can we now start to lighten and avoid that horrible color noise that we got previously. And so I'm going to grab a little brush, And I'm going to do this quickly. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm going to do some feathering. And what I basically want to do, let's just take this as a test area especially, is I want to bring up the exposure, shadows, and the highlights and just make this pop. And so with a brush in Lightroom, you can always do this after the fact, but I'm going to choose some values that I think are going to be about right. And I'm going to up the highlights because I want to hit this white water that we see and make that really pop. And then I'm going to add in some clarity, which is mid-tone contrast, which is a good thing to do as we move shadows into the mid-tones. We can bring back some contrast. I have the flow up at 100%. And let's give it a try and see what happens. Not bad. Not bad at all. Maybe not perfect, but certainly much better than brightening in Lightroom and then taking it to denoise. So that has some potential. You know what? I actually like that brush. So I'm going to stay with it. I'm going to select that brush again. And I'm going to reduce the flow, and I'm going to apply just a little bit of that in some other areas along the bank over here, maybe even up here. Maybe this tree right here as well. And I think that's looking pretty good. I'll take the exposure up just a little bit and the whites up just a little bit to make that water stand out a little bit more. Just a little more clarity. And let's see. It's not bad. I wonder what would happen. It seems to have produced some kind of banding or something like that, especially in these the rocks and the water down here. I wonder what would happen if I now take the noise. This slider is called noise, but it really should be called noise reduction. So I want to take noise reduction up in a positive fashion a little bit and use Lightroom to take out a little bit more of the noise that maybe we've reintroduced by now lightening up the photo again. Not too bad, not too bad. So what we really need to look at here is how good was my result, my final result. And I know I've done things a little differently in terms of colors and things like that, but I want to try to find edit 2 and compare these two photos back in the library and in the compare mode. Again, I'm going to hit Shift Tab to hide the panels, and on the left is my best efforts in Lightroom, and then taking it into Photoshop, like I said, to remove those power lines, which really wasn't necessary, but I did it. Color a little different. I cooled it down on this version a little more, but let's just look especially at the foreground and see how Lightroom compares to, I think, the best I could do with denoise. And I'm just thinking as I look, I don't see that big of a difference, and I almost think denoise has somehow introduced or left somehow still more color noise and kind of banding, whereas in Lightroom I've certainly smoothed out a lot of the detail, but at least it's cleaner. It's interesting though, when you look at the little hut, denoise did a much better job. It looks much cleaner and a little bit sharper. Maybe on the Lightroom side, maybe I could take out the noise a little more to smooth it and then brush back in some sharpening, possibly. But in that area, denoise seems to be the winner. But that's not really the most important area. Let's take a quick look at the sky. And the sky, the stars, looks very similar. So I think on this one, it's not quite a tie. I think there was really no reason to take it to denoise. It didn't really offer me any advantages. So we'll be back then to check out whether denoise and Sharpen AI can help out on these sandhill cranes under the stars in the Bosque del Apache in New Mexico. And we're back, as promised, and let's go right in and take a look at this picture of sandhill cranes under the stars in New Mexico. This was a cool shot that I conceived along with my workshop co-leaders and good friends Keith Bauer and Doug Brown a couple of years ago on our annual New Mexico workshop. And our idea was that we could have a starry sky kind of lighting up the famous crane pond, one of the famous crane ponds out there. I don't want to give everything away since I've never seen anybody try this before. But it was a cool shot. Our workshop group really enjoyed the photos they got and the technique behind it. I actually didn't take this picture. My friend Keith took this picture, but only because I put a card in his second card slot of his Canon 5D4, and I ran about 100 meters down the way and shined a very, very dim flashlight just to light up the sandhill cranes a little bit. Now, why didn't I just stand in front of them? I hate direct light when it's supplemental light, continuous light, or flashlight, which is something that you'll know about me if you've read any of my ebooks. So we wanted light that would still create some shadows, and I think we did a pretty nice job with that after a bit of experimentation. Now, what I want to see in this is two things. First, how will DeNoise help out with noise? The Canon 5D4 is an excellent camera and handles high ISO noise quite well, and color noise pretty well too at night. Plus, this is December at Bosque del Apache, and it gets cold in the desert, so it was probably down to around, I don't know, under freezing Fahrenheit, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, when we were photographing this. So I'm not that worried about color noise. And the other thing I want to see is whether Sharpen will help out, and this is my best version out of Lightroom, and I've applied, I believe, some noise reduction. Let's take a look. Yeah, some noise reduction. Maybe I'll crank it up just a little more. I've applied some color and luminance noise reduction to this photo. And the result's not bad. But you can see the cranes are not that sharp. Now, there are two reasons for that. For one thing, they're really small in the frame. You're not going to get the same sharpness in birds in a wide-angle shot where they're a tiny speck in the frame as you would if you had filled the frame with a telephoto lens with that same bird. But the other reason is I have a 25-second exposure, and the cranes are moving around a little bit, right? So they're not going to be that sharp. So I'm interested to see if Topaz Sharpen AI can help recreate some of the sharpness that would have been there if we were able to use a shorter shutter speed, let's say. Now, flash was an option, by the way, but I decided not to use flash in this case just because I thought one kind of instantaneous or sudden burst of light might be a little more disturbing to them than just a flashlight, a continuous light, because they're used to cars passing by on the highway right around here, so I'm not doing anything that they're not used to, but I thought a sudden flash pop might startle them, and I certainly don't want to mess with their behavior and make them waste energy. But flash would have been nice because it might have sharpened them up a little bit. But it didn't, so let's see if Sharpen AI can take care of that. First off, so what I've done very little to this picture, a little bit of exposure, maybe a tiny bit of color work, and that's about it. And, in the last section of this video, the previous section, the shot of the Bosque de Paz Eco Lodge, we proved that the order of operations does matter, that Topaz DeNoise can do a much better job if you take your raw file without doing exposure and color adjustments and things like that. Without doing that first, it's better to take your raw file straight over to DeNoise and let DeNoise work on it, and then after that, start to make some exposure adjustments. So I made an exposure adjustment here, but I'm not too worried about it, so I'm going to break the rule of what I learned last time. And I've already done some of the work ahead of time just to speed things up. So let's take a look at a virtual copy I created just as before, and it's the exact same processing as before, except for this one, I have not applied any luminance or any color. By the way, I should mention, you see sharpening, there's some applied. That's just the normal default amount of sharpening that Lightroom applies. I'm not going to worry about that. I could zero it out and see if that makes a big difference. I don't think it will. But let's just take a look at how the noise looks. And you can see there's some color noise and there's some luminance noise. Again, it was colder, so there's not quite as much color noise as there was on the shot from the Costa Rican cloud forest. And that's a difference between two cameras, but also a temperature difference. But there's certainly some. And so I wanted to see how Topaz DeNoise AI would handle that. So I took it over into Topaz DeNoise AI, and it did quite a good job. I was quite impressed with how it handled it. Now take a look here, and you can see that that's much better. And I'll give you a side-by-side comparison of the result from DeNoise versus the result versus just the regular Lightroom RAW file on the left. And so you can see the noise. Oh, I'm sorry, the Lightroom file is on the right. So you can see the original noise we were dealing with in the RAW file. And DeNoise did a very good job, and it did quite a nice job of trying to retain some sharpness in the grasses here too. And so I'm quite happy with this result. I think it looks pretty good. Let's do one more quick comparison. And again, here is my best result out of Lightroom. I'm going to compare that to the result from DeNoise. And so now on the left is Lightroom with my standard kind of exposure tweaks, just a little bit, and using Lightroom for noise reduction. And I've gotten rid of most of the noise. I left some in to retain some semblance of detail, hopefully. But I think DeNoise is definitely the winner here. So I did one more thing, as I mentioned. I wanted to see if Sharpen AI, would help us at all. And here's the result. I'm going to get out of compare mode. Here's the result from Sharpen AI. And so I took this, again, a little bit of exposure in Lightroom, no noise reduction at all in Lightroom. I took that over to DeNoise to take care of the noise, and then I took that TIFF file over to Sharpen AI. And this was the result in Sharpen AI. And to be honest, I really don't see, I had hoped it might sharpen up the stars a little bit, but it really didn't do anything there. And I don't see that it really did that much that I like in the birds. It just kind of added some noise. So let's take a look. Sharpen on the left and just straight DeNoise on the right, I believe is how it should be. Yeah, that's right. And I really don't see much of a difference. I don't see that sharpness did anything that I like better. And so I think it was not worth taking it over to Sharpen in this case. And so for me, the winner out of this shot is taking my Lightroom RAW file, doing just a little bit of exposure work, but not too much, and taking that over into Topaz DeNoise. And I think that turned out to be a pretty nice result. Now, I'm interested to know what Topaz DeNoise could do with older photos that we might have in our collection, such as this one, which I took on a beach on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, man, at least 10 years ago, I think. This was, I believe, with the original Canon 5D, 5D1. And you know, high ISOs have come a long way, baby. And this is okay. It's a really cool shot. I like things that are going on here. It almost doesn't look like it's in Costa Rica. This is low tide, so there's a big expanse of sandy beach. And I used a friend's vehicle to light this up over here. A little bright here because another vehicle came over. But I like what went on here as far as the light painting goes. And these wispy clouds, obviously, are really cool. And, you know, it's got a nice feel to it. It almost looks like it could be in the Middle East somewhere or something like that instead of tropical Costa Rica. So, this photo falls apart immediately if I wanted to, let's say, raise the exposure a little bit in the sand. And just take a look at what happens. I'm not too worried about the sky because I like the dark sky, but let's say I tried to raise exposures and shadows in the sand, and wow, that's a pretty huge mess, right? So, again, we learned that it's probably best, shadows. It's probably best to take our RAW file right over. And you can see I've done nothing to this photo. I don't remember if I did lens corrections maybe. Yep, I did that. And so this was ISO 3200, so I have a lot of high ISO noise. I have an old camera, which was great in its day, but not so much anymore. And I have a 30-second exposure, which again, on a steamy tropical beach, it's still, I don't know, 88 degrees or something like that outside. So the sensor is heating up quite quickly, generating a lot of color noise as well. So let's take it over into Topaz DeNoise and see what we can do with this guy. And again, from our previous experience, I'm going to try AI Clear right away. I'll just hit Auto. Not too bad, a little uneven, but did a pretty good job sharpening up over here. So I have to update the preview again every time I move around. It's a little frustrating. I'll pick a better spot where I can see a little bit of everything. But as we saw in previous photos, I can see that up at the top of the sky, it looked like the noise reduction was a little bit uneven. And I think that's really hard to deal with later. There's a lot of patchiness going on here. I do like what it did here. It actually kind of created some detail in there, not bad. These palm trees aren't especially sharp, but there was some breeze blowing, so over 30 seconds they're not going to be tack sharp, whereas the rocks would be. Certainly got rid of some noise down here. It's okay, I guess. For the sake of argument, let's try DeNoise AI. Just in case. I haven't used it enough where I know exactly what to do for each photo and what will and won't work. And that's part of the learning process. But again, Topaz, the DeNoise AI module within DeNoise AI continues to disappoint. So we'll go back to, I'm just going to try medium here. We'll go back to the AI Clear model, which just seems eminently superior for reducing noise in night landscapes. Okay, so we're back, and let's take a look here. So here is my, I'm going to jump back into the library module. Here's my raw file, and here's my effort out of DeNoise AI. So let's do a little quick comparison. On the left is my original raw file with all of its noise. And on the right is the output from Topaz DeNoise AI. There are definitely some issues here. I don't feel like it did a stellar job. Pardon the pun, starry sky. It was unintentional. And I shouldn't even have called attention to it because it wasn't worth it. Did a nice job in the sand, certainly. I'm a little concerned about this. So let's get out of here for just a second, and I'm going to give my Lightroom shot a try and see what would happen if I do some noise reduction in Lightroom. Quite a bit. It's a pretty noisy photo. And just see how that compares. Now, I've obviously smoothed out detail here. Didn't do a fantastic job here. Taking down the detail certainly does help some. And I'm going to quickly just show you a little trick I might try here, which would be an adjustment brush. And so I'm going to take the feather down. I'm going to use the new range mask tool, and I'm going to try to use, you know what, I think I'll use color, and I'm just going to try to sharpen up mostly the rocks. So what a range mask allows us to do in this case is to define the color values on which our adjustment brush will work. So I'm just going to sample in here, and I can either click a point, and then I can hit the shift key and click another point, and you can see there are different little eyedroppers there. I can draw a little rectangle to encompass more, and maybe I'll try some of this. What I want to do, of course, is simply keep my adjustment brush effects off of the bluish, white, black sky. So I'm going to dock the eyedropper here, and now I should be able to apply the effects of my adjustment brush without going outside the lines out into the sky. And what I want to do here mostly is probably a little clarity, maybe a little texture, but to try to bring back maybe a little sharpness, to try to bring back some detail here in the rocks and a little bit of the vegetation. And let's see how that did. Yeah, not bad. Not bad. So that's one way I would do it in Lightroom quickly. And let's take a look at how that compares then to the DeNoise version. And so on the left is the Lightroom version, on the right is the DeNoise version. And unfortunately here we have kind of a split decision, because I definitely like the sky better. It's much more consistent, it's much more even. I really don't know what to do with this shot, to be honest, that came out of DeNoise, because the sky just looks really weird. But I certainly like the land better. And that's kind of becoming a theme. You remember back in the Patagonia image earlier, that was kind of a theme too, where it did a good job on the mountains and it did a pretty inconsistent job in the sky. So I think, yeah, I'm not too sure about what to do about this one. We'll call it a tie for now, without with definitely no clear winner. Now, let's jump over to one more picture, and this is one of my favorites. God, I wish I could do this picture again, and maybe someday I'll be able to. But this is on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, and I did this again about 10 years ago. And I found out from a friend of mine named Nick Hawkins about a lone mangrove tree that I could shoot with a reflection out in the ocean at high tide. And so I went out to check it out one day. We had to drive about an hour and then walk down the beach a couple of hours. We went at midday. I checked it out. It certainly had potential. This is when I was working on my book, National Parks of Costa Rica, a few years ago, on the first edition of that. And I thought, this has great potential for a starry sky shot. Wouldn't that be fun? But high tide wasn't until 1 in the morning. So I said, well, let's do it. And so I went out with Nick and another friend of mine named Greg Downing. And we took some beers and we hiked in just before sunset. A couple hours, got there and waited until high tide. But while we were doing that, we discovered that there was bioluminescent algae, or actually bioluminescent dinoflagellates, breaking in the surf, creating these lines of phosphorescent blue. And it was just an amazing experience. And so what I did is I went way off to the side over here with a small headlamp, and I formed a little kind of snoot with some duct tape so that the light painting would only hit the top of the tree but wouldn't streak across the beach and make it look really obvious that I had light painted with a fake light source, right? With a headlamp or a flashlight or whatever. And the idea was that, you know, there's the light is coming from the sky up here. And so that was kind of our idea on light painting. Now, I had to use ISO 5000, 30-second exposure. So again, we're on a tropical beach, so there's color noise buildup. There's a lot of luminance noise buildup. And this was an old camera, Canon 1D Mark IV, which was certainly a good camera in its day. But again, the high ISOs just aren't the same. So this was my best take on this out of my raw file, which I then took into Photoshop at some point to do something. I don't remember. Again, this is an old photo. So here's the raw file of that shot. And a little light pollution off from probably the city of Punta Arenas across the Gulf. And this is what it looks like. And man, is there a lot of noise, as you can see. And if I tried to open up any of the shadows at all, this thing just falls apart in a heartbeat. And just look at some of the stuff going on here. And so there's a lot to work with. And so I'm not worried about trying to sharpen AI again. I don't think that really holds any potential for this kind of photography. And so what I want to do is just take this over to DeNoise again. And so I've created a virtual copy. And again, you can look here and see that this is the default color noise reduction that Lightroom applies. I'm going to even pull that back down. And I'm just going to take this right over into Topaz DeNoise and see what it can do for this old favorite file. I'm going to go with high for the noise reduction, and we'll update the preview and see how it does in the kind of the middle part of the sky. Not bad. Not bad at all. Let's see what it looks like down by the tree and the surf. Looks good enough. I'm going to go for it and send that TIFF back over to Lightroom, and we'll check things out. Okay, so let's take a look at how it compares to the raw file, first off. And you can see that I think it definitely did a nice job of removing noise. And I would say it did quite a nice job on leaving detail in the mangrove tree as well. Now there are some things in the mangrove tree, some portions of it that aren't sharp, but that was because of a breeze blowing. But I think DeNoise did a very good job of leaving detail in there where it wasn't moving. And so I'd say that's a win for sure. Over the raw file, right? Let's see now how it compares. And let me just do a little bit of quick processing here. You can see in my version what I really wanted. I don't need all that orange light pollution. I really want it to be about dark sky, bright stars, right? And to really make the bioluminescence stand out, I don't really care very much about this foreground at all. So really quickly, let's give this a little process. And maybe take shadows down, blacks down a little bit. And try a tone curve. And then quickly, I'll show you a little trick, part of the video here. I'm going to grab a graduated filter. And what I want to do is probably take the exposure down in the sky a little bit. I think shadows down. Maybe whites up. A little bit of clarity. Maybe a little bit of dehaze. Let's just see how that does. Yeah. A little too much. It's getting there. And I probably don't need very much saturation in there, so that could help to get rid of some of the contamination. Not bad. I probably have affected the mangrove tree a little bit, but it's okay for now. I think that's looking pretty decent. It's good enough for now. Anyway, let's say that. Maybe I'll take noise reduction up just a little bit since I've introduced some clarity and dehaze, which might introduce a little noise. And then quickly, I'm going to do one more thing, and that is I just want to brighten up and really bring out the blue to how it was. And so I'm just going to brush along here a little bit. I might do this in a more precise fashion, but for now, just to kind of match the look of the other picture, that should be good enough. So let's take a look at my take, where I did most of my work in Lightroom and I think a little bit in Photoshop, but that's basically noise reduction in Lightroom, and versus what I was able to do in Topaz DeNoise. So I think my take on the left and DeNoise on the right. And I think in this case, we have a winner, and I would say it's the DeNoise version, and so that's nice. I'll definitely go back and rework that file, I think, because again, it's an old favorite, and so I'm happy to see that DeNoise was able to improve it quite a bit for me. All right, that was a long journey. I hope you made it all the way through. You know, when I do these videos, I just get more and more into it, and I keep processing photos and trying to do things a different way to hopefully get the best results and to produce the best review possible. But let's just go over some conclusions. The main thing is I think Topaz DeNoise AI has a lot of potential. It didn't always win the little shootout test we did. It didn't always produce consistently good results. Sometimes there were some weird artifacts in the sky, but I certainly think it has a lot of promise for night photography. And so I'm certainly going to make it a part of my regular workflow for night landscape shots. I'm always going to take it. I'm always going to try a version in Lightroom with my normal processing where I do my noise reduction in Lightroom, but I'm always going to take it over to DeNoise AI to see if I could maybe get a better result. And as I pointed out, I'm usually going to use the AI Clear module within Topaz DeNoise AI. I found the standard module did not do a very good job for night landscapes at all, but that AI Clear within DeNoise AI did do a good job. The second big takeaway is that Sharpen AI, in my limited little test here and experience, did not really contribute a lot for the nocturnal landscape photographer. So I'm not going to resort to that very often. I might take a look at it on occasion because I have found that it might be useful for the occasional bird and wildlife shot. So I am going to keep it on my computer and have it available, but I'm certainly not going to make Sharpen a part of my regular night landscape workflow. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I really appreciate your time. And again, give me a like, give me a subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I'll catch you next time. Stay healthy, stay safe, and take care.